Welcome to the Modern Application Development Screencast. In this short screencast, we will learn how to set up a simple yet complete Flask project. Before we start, open the following applications on your Ubuntu desktop so that you can work along with me. A browser, Chrome or Firefox is fine, text or IDE or any of the open source IDEs is fine, just to explore and edit and color code. So anything would work. Use one of the open source ones suggested before. Terminal, the one which comes built into Ubuntu, is good enough. And please make sure you also have Python 3 installed so that it's easy to run the code. Right, until now we saw one file Flask project, literally. Let me just show you that actually. We had done an experiment with SQL Alchemy and Flask where we had written all of the code in just one file in this main file, right? So we can see that we have written application setup here or app setup here, setup of the models and then controllers and then whole application. This is okay, this works well if the application is very small. However, as the project grows bigger, it becomes very difficult to read, understand and maintain if all the code is in one single file. So it's always easy to read if you logically break it. So like in any Python project, let's use packages to organize code into different logical modules so that it's easy to read and find the code and modify it if it's required. It's also a better way of organizing the code so that where to find what, you know where to find what. And we will import these modules and packages as and when we require them, right? Like in any other Python project. Before we start, I would like to mention that there are many ways to set up a Flask Python project, right? It depends on team, whom you work with, size of the team, size of the project, many other factors that go in. Here, I'm going to show one way of doing it. I'm trying to keep it simple, but yet very, practical and logical so that it's easy for all of us to set up and run, right? So let me just show you the project setup, right? So I'm going to close this, which we already have, and then open, my new Flask setup, experimental Flask setup, right? So here you can see there is still a main.py, just some basic things. Like for example, it has all of my application or app setup code where I'm creating an app and running the app. This is the main functionality of this module or file. So basically it calls create app to create the app. Then when we actually run, it runs the app. So inside the create app, I'm just going to read the environment. I'm going to tell you more details about reading the environment basically and configuring. But basically it reads the configuration, sets up the DB, pushes the app into the context and returns the app. And the same app is used to run, right? And we are importing the things that are required to do that. For example, DB to initialize the DB and config to initialize the app config, etc, etc. For template folders, we are using the default template folders. So this is the basic setup, and now I'm going to explain each one of these, right? So let's say what's in the config and what is in the local development config. Let's see that where it is imported from. It's actually imported from this package called application, where we keep all our application code. You can see that only main.py is outside and rest of the modules or files are inside this package called application, right? Within that we have config, controllers, database and models. Now models and controllers are very straightforward and easy. Models has all the models we just extracted from previous our main.py into separate file called models.py, and we have put all of them here so that it's easy to find the models. It's in the models.py. Now database.py is not big currently. It's a simple thing which just sets up our Flask SQL Alchemy, exposes DB so that it can be used. So you can see in that our models, we are importing that and using that, right? Similarly, in our main.py, we are importing that from from database and then using that to init. Okay, so we're done with models and database. Straightforward. Now controllers is also straightforward. We're going to put all the controllers into it, but you can also extend it. If you have lots of controllers, you can create separate files for it or modules for it and use it. Also, Flask has this concept of blueprint, which we have not gone into, but if you really want to use it, you can use the blueprint. You can search on the Flask site, right? Blueprints and views. You can try that, right? But let's go with the simple ones and yet powerful ones, the standard controllers with routing. So they are there in the controllers. It's easy to find. If you really want to separate it out, you can say, I want all the article related controllers in article underscore controllers and all the author related controls in author underscore controllers, etc., etc. But here I'm just going to keep one of them, right? And then the most important one is config. Now each application will have certain set of configurations which vary based on the environment where the application is running, whether it's running locally or in production or in staging environment, etc. Like some of the setting could be like whether the debug statements should be printed out to in the browser. For example, in the local devel, you want them to be printed, but in production you don't want it to be printed because you'll be exposing some secret, some information about the app. So you want to switch off the debug in production. Also, for example, in local development, you might be using SQLite. In production, you might be using a completely different, database type. You probably are using Postgres in production or MySQL in production. So you could set up that. Here, you can see that I have config.py and I have defined a class called config. Here I've defined all the variables that we generally use. And then for local development config, I've set up another class called local development config, which extends this class config and set up some of them. Actually, whatever we want to override. For example, I just want to override this SQLite DB there and SQLite database URI. So I've just done that, right? So that, I can set up the SQLite database URI for my local development environment. If you wanted production, like for example, here debug is true. And let's say I wanted to set up a production config. I would probably copy paste this, right? And call it production config. And let's say even that is in DB directory, but let's say if it was called production DB instead of test DB, prod DB, then and I also wanted debug to be false because in production I don't want. So you can set up different environments like this, and based on env variable available at the OS, we can use one of the config. That's done here. For example, here I am reading from the environment a config called env. If its default value is environment, if no environment value is set up, then it will assume it to be development, right? You can just check the os.getEnv function details. If then nothing is provided, instead of returning null, it will return the default value development. If it's production, currently I'm just raising an exception because I had not set up any of these values. If I really want to read it, I can read this. If nothing is mentioned or if it's development, I'm going to starting local development environment. I'm going to print that and then going to import all the configs from the object local development config. It just reads each one of them and then sets it up in the config. Like we have learned in the previous one, for SQL Alchemy to work, we have to set up SQL Alchemy database URI into the config. Now here in the previous experiment, we are setting it up directly, right? Now we are not doing that. We are actually reading that from, setting that up in the config and then reading it from the config in the main.py, right? That makes it easy to change and maintain all the config in the setup. Sometimes, for example, if you're probably accessing Postgres database and you want to read the password, and let's say some variable like this password, and you may not want to actually put it into the code, you can actually do os.get-env, right? And then read it from the environment instead of actually putting into this file, so that you don't have to commit passwords into your jet or saving it into your local file, because it's generally a bad idea to put passwords into your code, inside your code. Don't directly put, like, I don't want to put, let's say your password is my secret password, and you don't want to put it here. You really want to read it from the os.get-env, right? And just say password, and it will read it from environment and set it up so that your code doesn't have any passwords, and it has a great chance of leaking it then, right? That's one of the uses of this. So now I'm just going to remove this because we are just going to experiment in local dev in config. And since we don't have any real secrets, I'm not reading anything from OS environment or any other environment config, so I'm not reading it, right? I'll just keep the debug as true because I just want to see it in the local development. So now we have learned all of it, and then templates is in the templates folder. Again, you can, inside the templates, you can create subdirectories for each of the type and organize the code the way you want and make it more meaningful in terms of organizing. If not, in this case, it's pretty straightforward, so I've directly put it under templates folder. Now there is a static folder. By default, Python application or rather Flask application serves all static files from a folder called static or from a route called static. So whatever you add into static folder can be directly accessed in your file. For example, like this. Like, for example, instead of directly taking it from Bootstrap, I'm actually reading it from my local static folder. So you can check for URL for static, which gives you URL for static /static router, and then I'm linking it to this file so that you can import it. Similarly for local style, if you have local styles, I have not I have a file here. I'm not put anything, but if you want to override and put your own styles, you can put it here. Similarly, you can, like, for example, if you're writing some JavaScript, you can, let's say, create a new let's say JavaScript folder, JS folder. Let's say, oh no, not file, folder. Just to keep it cleaner, I'll create a folder called JS, right? Inside that, I'll say, let's say custom, let's say we have written some validation .js, okay? I'm just, maybe we had a function called validate form, right? I am not going to do anything, but I'm just saying, right? I can just write console.log, but I'm not going to do anything, just leave it like that. Now, if you really want to use this inside your templates, it's straightforward to do it. You can just, you can write your script tag source. Right? You can actually do this itself right? Path for static, but file is not style CSS, it is JS slash what's the file name? Custom validations, right? I'm just going to copy it, custom validations.js, so you can include, and the URL will be correct and it will be loaded from locally from your static folder. That's how we use static folder. Of course, you can host it somewhere else on a CDN or somewhere, but for a simple Flask app, you can still use it to serve. Right, so this is done, and then what other files are left? We, as usual, have a requirements.txt where I've mentioned all the requirements of Flask and Flask SQL Alchemy. Here I've pinned to the version, which version I want to use. If you don't mention it, it will use the latest version. I think it's always important to put the version, that you stick to a specific version. It makes it easy to debug, and if you want to compare your and your teammates setups, it becomes easy to compare and check and stuff like that. So it's always easy to do that. Now locally, to do run or to set up my project, I've written 2 bash scripts. You don't have to write it, because we always keep repeating, activating, setting up the environment like you would have seen previously. I've just written a script for that, and similarly for run. But I'll show you, without running these. You can directly run by writing the commands directly instead of running these sh. But we can share these sh files or shell files for you to make it easy to experiment or. Okay, so now let's go back to one last thing. So here is where we are actually reading the environment. So when you actually run, I'm setting it up as development here. You can see export env is equal to development. So this gets read here in the main.py and sets up the configuration. Now if I actually wanted to run in production or any other environment, I will go back and set up a environment as per that specific environment and run it, right? So now we can just run it just to try it locally. I'll already set up the environment, you can check. Let me just say ls minus ltr. You can see that I have not set up environment. So let's set up environment and run it. So here, let me just check in local setup. Here you can see that it checks for a folder called .env. If the folder exists, I'm written installing using Poetry, but it's just pip, not Poetry, right? I'm then creating a virtual environment inside that .env. If the folder doesn't exist, then activating it, and then installing all the requirements. We can do it manually as well, or we can do it using this script. So let me just do it using this script. Okay, so sh local setup. So it created a .env folder. It seems like it already exists, so it's just up reinstalling everything. So we can check ls minus a .env exists, right? Okay, now you can, again, to run, you can actually just activate it and set up the environment and run, right? So let's do it. I'm going to just do it manually instead of running local run, okay, just to make sure that we all know what we're doing. So I just have to source.env virtual environment bin activate. That's how you source it. It's enabled now, right? And then we have to export the environment as development, because we want development config to be used, right? So I'm going to do export env is equal to development, development. If you want to check whether it's set up properly, then you can just do echo $env. So you can see that it's printing the value development. Now we have set, and I just have to run it. To run it, I just have to do python main.py. Okay, So there is some indentation problem. Let's go check it. I must have by mistake done something. Let's go. Okay, yeah, that was mistake. Okay. So it's, you can see it's printing a warning, we are starting a development environment, do not use it in production. It's also because we are using the default development server on the Flask. In production we'll be using a different kind of server. So it's active, running locally on port 8080 because that's what we have asked it to run here, right? So let's check that application where it's running properly. There you go, it's running. It's the same application that we saw last time, right? It's running properly. Now I've set up the same thing on Replit 2. You can see all of it. You have main.py, which is same. Then you have application Azure package and all the modules inside it. Then you have this bootstrap has been put by mistake outside. It should go inside static. So I'm just going to move it. Right? Okay, let's see. Oh, where did it go? Not here. Okay. Oh yeah, it's got moved. It took some time. It's just a network issue. So it got moved inside it. This is the correct path of it. I've not put other unused files here, but you can upload them or create new files like style.css. Like you can just create add file. Was it in this path or was it inside CSS? No. Style CSS directly under. So let me just create add file style CSS. That's it. I mean, I'm not going to add anything. If you want to customize something, you can. And then there's a templates folder with templates, right? All of it is there. And our DB is been moved into DB directory, which is same here. Our DB, put it under DB directory. It could be anywhere on the OS. We're just, clearly mentioning this is a DB directory and putting the DB inside that, right? So that's why if you look at my config, it says that get the SQL Alchemy database URI by joining this string which says it's SQLite, and by joining SQLite DB directory, which is DB directory, and the name of the file, which is SQLite file, right? Similarly, right? Now here we were actually setting environment by running export env is equal to development. You can't do that directly. I mean, you can probably, but it's better way to set up using here environment variables. So you can go to environment variables here. I've already set it up. You can click. I've set it up env is equal to development. But if I delete, it's not that difficult. You can go to environment. Let me click again. Okay, so you can click new one, env, set it up to development based on your settings, but I'm just going to use the same development thing and add, right? So now it's set up. Okay, you can check the values like etc. Now you can go back to your file explorer. Now everything is set up just like how we had it locally, right? The thing is, I've also pre-added the packages already, like I showed you last time. I've already added Flask and Flask SQL Alchemy because it's good. Like I said, Replit uses Poetry to do that, right? Now I'm just going to run it, right? Let's go back to this, go to main and run. Might take a couple of seconds. Okay, it's running. So you can see that, right? It's running. Similar project structure, everything. Now we have a good project or decent project structure to do all your work. So now if you want to extend more, you can go to models and add more models and define relationship. Let's say For example, you want to do tags. Each article you want to add tags, so you can define a model called tags, and then or add your controllers, get tags or get articles by tags and stuff like that. So you can keep working on it by yourself, or if you're working with a team, if it's a collaboration with your team, right? So maybe we can share the URL of this setup, so you can fork it, and try it out. Okay, now there are many, like I said in the beginning, there are many ways to set this up, right? So Flask also has some ways, does some recommendation how to set it up. So you can go to Flask a project, and they have a project layout. You can check it out how they set up. It's not very different, but they have their own some suggestions which are interesting, that you can pick it up and use it. And you can also see how they set up the application and run. It's not a bad way as well. So if you want to follow that should also be fine. But just make sure that if you are trying on Replit, I think it requires a file called main.py to run. It's probably just a way Replit runs. So that's why probably forking this and trying it out will be an interesting way to learn it, right? And you can also go to GitHub or any code repo and search for Flask cookie cutter projects, and you can get to see many projects, and you can check how they have organized the code and what's good or bad about it, so that you can learn. Actually, that's it from this screencast about Flask project setup. Hope you'll get to set up and run the project. Thank you so much. Bye.